This experience for me happened in 2009 when my mother was having health problems. She was living with our family. However, it wasn't long before her health began to deteriorate rapidly. A few months ago, she was in a coma. The pain in her knees had been tormenting her, which made her life more difficult. Toward the end of her life, she became extremely depressed. My mom and I have always maintained a very close relationship. We had a deep bond, and she was the kindest person I have ever met. She loved her children and grandchildren dearly. The night before she died, there was an argument between my mom and me. This was a very rare occurrence between us. The reason for the argument was that she was planning to move out and live with my aunt. We had told her many times that this was not a good idea because my aunt had always been an alcoholic and it could have a negative effect on her health and life. During that heated argument, I said some very hurtful things that I regretted afterwards. I wish I could take back the words that hurt her. That night's argument left me with a painful memory. The next morning, I was awakened by the sound of the alarm clock in my mother's bedroom. Usually, she woke up with me when the kids were getting ready for school. I knocked on her bedroom door, but it was locked. Anxiety began to build up inside me as I realized that something might not be right. Eventually, I decided to open the bedroom door. As I entered the bedroom, I fell to my knees, and I was met with an unbelievable scene. My mother was lying quietly on the bed and her breathing had stopped. I don't know the exact time, but I could sense that she had died early in the morning or late at night, and that she had left us peacefully in her sleep. Her body was very cold, which made me even more convinced that she had passed away. I could not accept this reality. In her hand, she was still holding a cross, which seemed to be her comfort in her last moments. The scene shook me deeply. When I saw the sleeping pills on the table, I realized that my mother had committed suicide. I was shocked and confused. In Christianity, suicide is usually considered a serious offense, which can result in the permanent banishment of one's soul. I knew that my mother was a devout Christian, yet she had made this decision. At the funeral, the pastor recited a prayer, asking God for forgiveness and also praying for the salvation of my mother's soul. Christmas that year was a very sad time for us. During the holiday season, we had to deal with the loss of our mother. As time passed, I still could not fully accept the reality that she was gone. Sometimes I felt as if she was still in the house. Sometimes it is very strange to have my things suddenly disappear and then find them in another place. In life, my mother also had a habit of leaving things lying around. Over the next few months, I fell into a depression. One night, everything changed. I had just closed my eyes when I realized I was in a strange room. The sun was shining through the window, illuminating the room with warmth and brightness. I remember feeling an indescribable sense of peace and happiness. My first thought was to go to the window because the sunlight felt so warm on my skin. The place gave me a sense of relaxation that I hadn't felt in a long time. Through the glass, I see a peaceful garden. Flowers of all colors flutter in the breeze. There are brightly colored roses and elegant tulips, which open up piece by piece, giving off their fragrance. In the center of the garden, there was a small fountain, the water droplets glittering in the sunlight, emitting a diamond-like glow. In the distance, I saw a forest. A flock of birds flew through the air. As I stepped out of that room, day suddenly turned into night. The garden in front of me disappeared. I looked ahead and found a huge playground. The whole scene was filled with mesmerizing colors. These colors, which I had never seen in real life, could not be described by common colors. Those colors were so brilliant, so unique, as if they were from another world. There, I saw a huge and beautiful Ferris wheel, which kept spinning in the night sky. I turned my head to the right and was surprised to find my mother standing beside me. I was very surprised by her appearance. She looked exactly the same as she did when she was alive, without the slightest change in her features. Her eyes were filled with warmth. I asked her, "Mom, is it really you?" The moment I said this, her appearance suddenly changed. She changed back to the way she looked when she was in her 20s. She was wearing a gorgeous evening gown which glowed a deep blue color. The gown was embellished with shimmering silver sequins. She looked young and beautiful. She glowed with youth and vigor. She looked at me with a smile and then quickly ran away as if she had been set free. I rushed into the playground after her. As we stood there, 3 angels appeared before us. These angels were wearing pure white robes. The robes looked very light, as if they were made of feathers. Their blonde hair shone like the sun. Their turquoise blue eyes were deep and clear, radiating incomparable compassion and serenity. Although these angels were not very tall, their presence was solemn and mysterious. We communicated telepathically. Though no speech or words were used, they were able to deeply understand each other's thoughts and emotions. This communication transcended the limitations of words. The angel took us deeper into the amusement park. Here I saw some strange buildings that were completely different from the real world. One building looked like it was constructed of rainbows and glowed with brilliant colors. Another building took on a fantastic geometric shape that seemed to be made of crystals and glass, reflecting dazzling light. We followed the angel into one of the buildings. The interior of the building was spacious and bright. The walls seemed to be made of crystal. In the center of the room was a huge crystal table with various rare gems that gave off a shimmering light. There was also a mirror inside the room. I approached the mysterious mirror, my eyes watching myself. This was no ordinary mirror, but a mysterious object with supernatural powers. In the mirror, I saw my past. On the couch in the living room, my mother always held me in her arms. At that time, she would often read fairy tales to me. I also saw us making crafts together. My mother always encouraged me, and she taught me how to draw and make small crafts. Those times were so happy and meaningful. Whenever I was in trouble, my mother was always by my side. These memories played like a movie in the mirror, making me feel as if I had returned to those wonderful moments. In the mirror, I also saw many visions of the future. I was in a serious car accident in my old age that caused me to lose my leg. This scene was shown very vividly in the mirror. I saw myself lying at the scene of a car accident. Vehicles were damaged, emergency vehicles and paramedics surrounded me. My expression was filled with pain. The sight was very disturbing to me. I asked the angels around me if these things could really happen. My eyes were filled with unease, and I desperately needed an answer. The angel looked at me, and he responded telepathically to my question. Not necessarily, the angels told me, the future is full of uncertainty, and just because you see the scene in the mirror doesn't mean it will happen. Life is full of possibilities, and your choices and behaviors affect the future. Next, we went up a flight of stairs together to another room. Inside the room were 2 things that looked like bathtubs, one located on the left side of the wall and the other on the right side of the wall. The tubs were filled with clear liquid. My mother looked at me, then, she walked towards one of the tubs and immersed herself in the liquid. Then, a piece of clear glass covered the top of the tub, completely enclosing her inside. My mind was filled with confusion as to what this meant. It was one of the strangest things I had ever seen. Suddenly, I felt the whole space move upward. I felt intense love. As if God was right next to me. Even though I couldn't see him with my own eyes, I could feel his presence. I left that room and found a sidewalk wide enough for 4 people to walk side by side. I was surrounded by other people, but they didn't notice me. As I looked to my left, I saw majestic peaks and waterfalls. Below the peak was a beautiful valley filled with wildflowers. If you think the colors on Earth are gorgeous, you're wrong. The colors here are much more muted, some of which I've never even seen before, much less know how to describe them. As I continued walking on the sidewalk, I saw a garden on my right. It was filled with fruit trees. The gates were covered with vines. I was ready to check out the garden when, just then, a voice came from behind me who warned me not to enter the garden. Although I didn't see anyone, I knew he was God. If you ask me, how do you know it was God? All I can tell you is that when you were there, you won't doubt what I'm saying. The sheer joy of being there is irresistible. I felt like I was home. I made my heart's desire known to God that I longed to be reunited with my mother and wanted to be with her. However, God said to me, "No, it is not time for you to leave. You must stay on earth and learn more." To this day, I still ponder what knowledge I need to learn. This question haunts me. Even though I don't understand the exact answer, I believe that time will give the answer. Then, the scene in front of me slowly began to become blurry. I kept falling through the air. Although I didn't feel any discomfort, I felt a little scared because I had no idea where I would be going. It seemed like I had been falling for a very long time, and eventually I landed in a place that looked like a market. I suddenly woke up from my dream. That dream was so real and shocking. I thought over and over again about everything that had happened. I felt that it was all God's arrangement. God had brought me to my mother to help her ascend to heaven. My mother needed my company and guidance to find her way to heaven. As skeptical as such an experience may be, for me, it was the truest thing I have ever experienced. Not only did this experience make me rethink the meaning of life and death, but it also touched my deepest emotions.
On September 8, 2011, I experienced something that changed my life. On that day, I was working on a pressing project. At some critical stage of the project, my colleague and I disagreed on a decision. The crux of the issue was about the allocation of resources to the project, specifically, how to allocate the limited human resources. I believed that the resources should be allocated to our team. However, my colleague disagreed and insisted that the resources should be allocated to the project he was responsible for. We had a heated debate on this issue, giving each other our respective views and reasons. This disagreement gradually evolved into an argument. After work that day, my mood became very bad. I decided to go to a nearby bar in the hope of soothing my mood. It was about 10 p.m. when I decided to drive away from the bar. This was a very dangerous and unwise decision. After I drove some distance, my eyes began to become heavy. Despite the fact that I felt tired, I did not take appropriate measures. Slowly, my eyelids became heavier and heavier. My consciousness began to become blurred. Suddenly, I heard the shrill sound of a car horn. When I opened my eyes, I realized that a car was coming towards me from the opposite side. I hit the steering wheel hard to the right. My car ran off the highway. The vehicle crossed a farm field and my body swayed uncontrollably. Eventually, my vehicle hit a tall utility pole with a terrible crashing sound. My head began to ache violently and a rush of blood blurred my vision. My life was slipping away. In that moment, I tried to stay conscious, but my body became weaker and weaker. After a while, I felt myself being drawn by some invisible force that took me into the dark unknown. Then I heard someone calling my name. With great effort, I raised my head and saw a beautiful angel. This angel had very long blonde hair that fell like a golden waterfall. Her eyes were a deep blue, clear and pure, as if they could see into my soul. Her face was full of compassion and made me feel very at ease. She wore a long, white robe. Her beauty came not only from her appearance, but also from a divine aura that transcended humanity, radiating infinite light and love. Her presence warmed me. She reached out a hand and said to me, "Come on, take my hand, we don't have much time." I didn't understand what was happening, but this was not the time to question it. With her warm gaze, I took her hand without hesitation. At that very moment, I heard a soft thud. It was as if my body was free from the bonds of gravity, and a feeling of lightness and freedom filled my soul. My soul left my body as if floating in some unknown space. Then the angel began to soar swiftly into the night sky and I felt myself being taken off the ground. I looked down and some strange creatures were staring up at me. The creatures looked so monstrous that it was as if they were from hell. Their bodies were twisted and deformed, their skin filled with cracks. Their heads were strange and terrifying, and their eyes were like blood-red flames, their pupils filled with an evil glow. These creatures seemed hostile, and their presence frightened me. They tried to approach me as if to drag me into an abyss of darkness. The angel calmly told me that these spirits were cursed. She went on to explain that I was safe here and did not have to worry about these cursed souls. Her voice gave me an inexplicable sense of peace. With her guidance, I was ready to continue my mystical journey. Curious, I asked that angel where we were going. She smiled and answered me, "I will take you to heaven." This answer surprised me because I hadn't been to church in 10 years and rarely even prayed. 10 years ago, my best friend died in a traffic accident. At that time I had prayed to God but received no answer. I became skeptical about the reality of God, which dealt a heavy blow to my faith. Secondly, I gradually lost myself in real life. The pressure of work took up most of the time. I felt that faith did not help much in coping with real problems. I felt that praying was a great waste of time. And religious beliefs had become strange and distant in my life. I didn't quite understand why I was considered a devout believer. After a while, the angel told me that we had arrived. The angel gently let go of my hand and we came to a magnificent circular building. The building was tall and magnificent and shook me to my core. The doors were beautifully carved with patterns and mystical symbols, exuding an ancient and mysterious atmosphere. As we approached the gate, it began to open slowly, as if welcoming us. I felt both excited and slightly nervous inside. But I knew that no matter what happened, the angels would always be with me. A huge building appeared before us. The building was tall and magnificent, as if it were a sacred temple. The walls of the building were very smooth and shimmered with a faint glow. As I walked into the building, my eyes were caught by an intense light. At first, the light was very harsh. I saw a huge figure sitting on a throne, and I couldn't make out his face because the light was so bright. After a while, the light gradually became softer and I was finally able to make out the man sitting on the throne. He had distinctly Jewish features. His skin looked very healthy and his hair and beard were brown. He was wearing a long, white robe. I realized that this was Jesus. He said, "Welcome, my child. All your questions will be answered in due time." This statement puzzled me. He seemed to understand my inner thoughts. He continued, "My child, you are dead now." He continued sternly, "You are drinking and then driving, and this behavior is deadly. This is not what you set out to do." I felt guilty and ashamed. I had tried to hide everything, but in this place it seemed there were no secrets to hide and everything was exposed to him. He seemed to see my confusion and he went on to say, "You are not here to be punished, your judgment day has not yet come." Then why am I here? Jesus sighed in disappointment and seemed to regret my attitude. "You are here," he said softly, "to reflect on what you have done in the past." No sooner had he said this than I saw the scene from the car accident that occurred and the images kept coming back to me. My car had crashed into another car that held a couple and their daughter. The force of the impact totaled their car and they were tragically killed on impact. The little girl ended up quadriplegic. After watching this scene, I cried out loud, "Why did you make me see this?" I felt like my insides were in agony like knives. Jesus responded, "Show you this so you can be a better version of yourself." I didn't know what was going to happen next or what this place really meant to me. I felt frustrated and self-condemned. I was a complete wreck. I began to question my existence and worth. Jesus reached out and gently patted me on the shoulder. He said, "Don't beat yourself up too much, my child. You were not brought here to be plunged into self-doubt and confusion, but to make you realize something important. Everyone has a past, everyone has made mistakes. But the past shouldn't define your future. You still have a chance to change and become a better version of yourself." I felt understood and accepted, and it was an unparalleled comfort to no longer feel alone and self-conscious. In my next conversation with Jesus, his words seemed to contain a warning. Jesus reminded me that mankind is destined to destroy mankind. You have done so countless times and will do so again. Jesus then showed me a series of amazing images, each one a part of human history. I saw ancient mankind killing each other on a battlefield. The battlefield was covered with sand and smoke, and the warriors were armed with all kinds of cold weapons. It was a brutal war, with people fighting for territory and power. The soldiers' armor was covered with blood and mud. The battlefield was filled with the smell of death. Soldiers struggled in the chaos, fighting to the last ounce of their strength for survival and victory. The scene was chilling and made me deeply feel the cruelty and ruthlessness of war. Time and again, wars in human history have brought great suffering and destruction. Then the scene jumped to the time of the Industrial Revolution, when warriors used rifles to shoot each other on the battlefield. The soldiers are wearing uniforms. It was a modernized war, and the scale and destruction of the war was even greater. I see hatred in the eyes of the warriors as they fight for their country. War during the Industrial Revolution was full of struggle and pain, and this scene touched me deeply. The scene jumped again, taking me back to the end of World War II, and I saw the horrific sight of a nuclear bomb being dropped. A huge atomic bomb exploded overhead, creating a huge mushroom cloud, complete with a devastating fireball and intense radiation. This explosion instantly destroys the city of Hiroshima and the city is reduced to rubble. The scene jumped again and I saw an even more horrific future war. The scale and lethality of this war was horrific. Millions of people were killed in this conflict and many cities were completely destroyed. First, a huge nuclear bomb exploded in Europe. Countless people were killed in the explosion. It was a devastating disaster that caused immeasurable damage to human society. Then, another nuclear bomb exploded in South America, spreading a fiery fireball in all directions. The entire continent was gripped by war and people faced unimaginable suffering. The missiles appeared to have been launched from Asia. My heart was filled with pain and doubt, so I posed the question to Jesus, since you knew this would happen in the future, couldn't you do something about it? However, my question seemed to offend Jesus and his smile disappeared and was replaced by a surge of anger. He replied, "Why should we stop it? Most people have banished us from their lives. Most have lost their faith. Why should we save your race again?" I was shocked and puzzled. Jesus explained that my Father had wanted to destroy the human race, but in the end gave you a chance. Jesus reminded me that when I returned I should tell those who would listen that if they did not heed the advice then they would face destruction. Again, Jesus emphasized, "Now, I must return to the real world and deliver this important message." I gently nodded my head in agreement. Jesus' eyes were full of encouragement and trust. He touched my shoulder and a wave of warmth and strength infused me. After our conversation was over, Jesus began to disappear in front of me. After a while, I felt myself begin to move downward, as if I were landing on an unseen path. This process was accompanied by a strong vibration. As the vibrations intensified, I gradually returned to the real world. The process was like crossing the border of time and space. After I reconnected with my body, I heard someone tapping on my car window. I looked up at the car window and realized it was a doctor. The paramedic rushed to me and said, "Don't worry, we're here to save you." They lifted me into the ambulance and then quickly transported me to the hospital. In the hospital, I underwent a series of tests. One of them was to test my blood alcohol level. I silently thanked God because the test results showed that my alcohol level was 0. It was many years later that I was brave enough to write this article because I felt scared and uneasy. Many people would not believe what I was saying, and even I myself sometimes wondered if my experience was real. I share this story here, not to garner sympathy, but to convey a message. I know that Jesus is coming. This is an urgent and important message, and I want people to listen and respond positively.